Hello, everyone. Here with a new crime true story, it's Mario. And today, we will talk about the Setagaya family and the night they all left our world in one single night. Let the video start. It was the night between December 30th and 31st, 2000. The end of one year and the dark hinge into a new one. In a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood of Setagaya, Tokyo, a house that once smelled of family dinners and children's laughter became something else. The scene of one of modern Japan's most baffling, chilling crimes. 4 people, a husband, a wife, and their 2 young children, were found savagely murdered inside their own home. The way the killer behaved after the murders, the casualness, the domestic gestures, is what would haunt investigators and the public for decades. Mikio and Yasuko Miyazawa were in their 40s. Their daughter Niina was 8. Their son Rei was 6. Neighbors remembered them as ordinary people. Warm, polite, part of the fabric of that suburban block where kids left bikes out, and the evening sounds were discreet. On the morning of December 31st, Yasuko's mother came by to check on the family when she couldn't reach her daughter by phone. What she found would send a ripple through Japan. The 4 bodies in the house and the impossible question: who would do this, and why? The first disquieting fact investigators uncovered was that this was not a break-in with a quick, panicked exit. The intruder, or intruders, had entered sometime near midnight, but instead of fleeing, the person remained. In the hours after the murders, the killer used the family's computer, consumed food and drinks from the refrigerator, notably several ice creams and bottles of barley tea, used the toilet without flushing, tended to wounds with first aid supplies, changed clothes, and left behind an array of personal items. In short, he treated the house like a temporary refuge, rather than the scene of an emergency. Those post-murder actions would produce an extraordinary amount of forensic material. That forensic windfall should have been the killer's undoing. Police collected thousands of pieces of evidence from the house: clothing, a hip bag, a scarf, gloves, cigarette butts, fingerprints, and biological samples. Enough that some reports put the total number of items logged well into the tens of thousands as the case files grew. The most significant of these finds was DNA, blood that did not belong to anyone in the Miyazawa family, and other genetic material that hinted the killer might not be purely Japanese in ancestry. For years, the DNA sat like a promise. The technology would catch up, or someone would match it to a known criminal. But no match emerged. Let's step back and walk through that night, based on what the police reconstruction suggested. The second-floor bathroom window at the rear of the house, adjacent to a park, had its screen found on the ground outside. Footprints in the mud nearby suggested the killer entered that way, a small, stealthy entry into a private space. Inside, the violence began upstairs. 3 people were stabbed. 1 child was strangled. But after the killings, the killer did not immediately abandon the property. Instead, he roamed, he ate, he used the family's computer late into the night, and he cleaned up some things while leaving behind others. A maddening mixture of care and sloppiness that would confound behavioral profilers. Understand how strange that is. Most violent criminals flee, try to destroy evidence, or, if panicked, do nothing but run. This perpetrator, by contrast, behaved like someone who believed he would not be identified. He bandaged himself with the family's medical supplies and changed shirts, but he also left fingerprints and DNA on cups and tissues. He took a small amount of cash and ransacked papers, but he left large sums behind. He apparently even ate melon, an odd, almost casual flourish after a particularly brutal act. Those contradictions formed the central puzzle of the case. Was he impulsive and sloppy, or calm and deliberate? Was he familiar with the area, or transient? Was he intimately connected to the family, or a random intruder? The DNA gave investigators a tantalizing, if confounding, profile. Analyses suggested the perpetrator was male, and the maternal lineage in the DNA hinted at European ancestry, possibly from Southern Europe or the Adriatic region, while the paternal markers were East Asian. In other words, the killer's genetic signature suggested some mixed ancestry: a mother from a European background and a father from East Asia. That made the suspect statistically unusual in Japan at the time. Police and media speculated about foreigners, military bases, or long-distant ancestors. These leads would spawn theories, but no arrest. Let's talk about evidence handling and the scale of the investigation, because the size of the response says something about how seriously the Tokyo Metropolitan Police treated this case. From early on, the police considered it among their highest priorities. Detectives cataloged more than 12,000 items of physical evidence, and the case stayed open and active as technologies advanced. Over the years, police revisited the DNA, reran analyses, and periodically released new forensic sketches and composite images based on fingerprints and other traces. Despite all that effort, and despite periodic media interest and public theories, the core question remained: why, with so much material left behind, did the killer evade capture? We should pause and consider motive. Theories splinter into many directions, and each has problems. Some suggested burglary gone wrong. The killer took only a small amount of money and left most valuables in place, which doesn't square with a crime of pure financial motivation. Others argued for a personal vendetta, but there was no clear indication the Miyazawas had enemies. A particularly persistent theory reached into the strange and murky realm of cults and coercion. The idea being that perhaps the family's associations, real or rumored, angered someone. Those claims have never been substantiated and often rely on speculation rather than primary evidence. Then there are explanations that point to the killer's psychology. Perhaps he was a transient or drifter who snapped. Perhaps someone with a damaged moral compass who rationalized their actions and felt no urgency to hide afterwards. Every theory fits some facts and breaks others. That's the problem with piecing motive from fragments. One detail that captured public imagination and rightly or wrongly sketched the outline of a suspect in many minds was the killer's clothing. Among the items found were pieces of attire that were distinctive: a hip bag, a hat, gloves, and some garments that matched brands sold primarily on or near U.S. military bases in Japan. That detail led some to think the killer might have ties to foreign communities around those bases. That line of inquiry produced leads, but again, no match. Clothing alone rarely convicts. It can, however, narrow possibilities and suggest avenues for questioning. Another weird, specific trace was foreign sand found at the scene, reportedly similar to sand from Nevada. And that odd little breadcrumb fueled rumors of a traveler or someone who had recently been to a distant place. Whether that sand truly linked to a specific location or was a coincidence remains contested, but it fed the narrative of a killer who was either well-traveled or had unusual connections. It's the sort of detail that true crime communities fixate on because it seems like a thread you can tug. In real investigations, single unusual traces often raise possibilities but rarely provide conclusive links without corroborating evidence. What about eyewitness accounts? Few reliable sightings connected to the night were reported, and nothing definitive emerged. There were reports of footprints and of a person seen near the family home in the hours around midnight, but these leads either ran cold or could not be corroborated tightly enough to point to a single suspect. The lack of a confident eyewitness identification, even given the outstanding forensic materials, highlights an ugly reality. DNA and physical evidence can outstrip the social memory of a community. You can have a fingerprint without a face that someone recalls. In the years after the murders, the case changed public discourse in Japan in small, consequential ways. It became a symbol of the fragile sense of safety in a society where violent crime is comparatively rare. The gruesome details, especially the presence of 2 young children among the victims, captured national attention and provoked questions about everything from neighborly trust to policing resources and the pace of forensic science. The case also drove public conversations about the statute of limitations for serious crimes. High-profile cases like this helped shift legislative momentum. Even when a case remains unsolved, the social ripples can change law and procedure. Over the decades, investigators kept at it. New DNA techniques, improved databases, and periodic public appeals have been part of that persistence. Police released composite images and sketches, public rewards were offered, and the investigation remained active in the hands of successive detective teams. At various anniversaries, news outlets would profile the case, and amateur sleuths, online forums, bloggers, and podcasters constructed their own theories from the public record. None of those threads produced a legal resolution, but they kept the memory of the Miyazawa family alive and the pressure on authorities to keep searching. Let's contour the most plausible suspect profiles in light of the evidence. One possibility: a young man, possibly in his late teens to early 30s at the time, right-handed, of slim build, who had no significant criminal record, explaining why his DNA produced no matches in Japanese criminal databases. The DNA's mixed ancestry signals either a truly mixed heritage individual or someone with an ancestor far back in the maternal line. Another profile points to someone who was not a local family friend. The brutality and randomness of the attack, coupled with the post-crime behavior, suggest an outsider rather than a domestic dispute escalating horribly. But again, each profile is provisional. The case resists neat categories. What might a viewer take away from all of this? First, that violent crimes can be messy and contradictory. People do unpredictable things in the heat of a moment, and even the most thorough forensic sweep can leave gaps. Second, that technology helps, but does not guarantee justice. DNA is a powerful tool, but it only works if there is something or someone to match it to. Third, that communal memory matters. Neighbors, friends, and relatives hold pieces of the story that sometimes never make it to an official report. And sometimes they do. The Setagaya case sits at the intersection of advanced forensic promise and the stubborn stubbornness of human mystery. As we approach the end of this recounting, it's worth reflecting on the families. The Miyazawa family's home became the physical locus of a national wound, and the surviving relatives have had to live with public scrutiny and private grief. In many true crime stories, it's easy to get lost in theories and evidence and forget the people who mattered most. For the Miyazawas, no piece of paper or sample of DNA returns them. The work of investigators, journalists, and even amateur listeners can be valuable and important, but it should also be respectful. Remembering the victims as people, not just as plot points, is part of a responsible retelling. Finally, the case remains open. Police periodically release updates and ask the public to look again. If you're someone drawn to this story, there are ways to help responsibly. Consult primary materials from Tokyo Metropolitan Police, read careful reporting that cites sources, and avoid spreading unverified conjecture that can harm innocent people. The Setagaya murders are a puzzle with many pieces, some found and many still missing. The hope is that, sooner or later, a single new fact, a match in a database, a retired witness recalling a detail, a discarded object turning up linked to a traveler, will reorient the investigation and bring answers. Until then, the house by the park stands as a quiet reminder that even in familiar places, terrible unknowns can happen. Hey again, guys. This is the end of the video, and I know the video isn't very premium, but it's why I can do it the moment. Hope to see you again soon.